I spend a lot of time playing co-op horror titles, specifically investigative horror. You may or may not have seen my tier list of games in the genre, and, well, the co-op horror format in general. You're statistically more likely in the may not camp, actually. Regardless, I do need to update it and knock some games down a few pegs. I really didn't realize at the time just how many asset-flipping backrooms games there were. I mean, good God, man. However, I'm making this video to talk about a small selection of games in particular, the, in my opinion, standouts of the specifically investigative horror stuff. You know, the games where you have to search for clues with a myriad of tools or abilities and marking it down as a done deal once you think you've solved it, or, if not, going a step further and eliminating the problem entirely, all while trying not to die, of course. Of course, we have Phasmophobia, and we also have it to thank for the general surge of similarly themed games, and some outright clones. There are others, though, that I'd put right up there next to, or at least near, Phasmophobia for one reason or another. These others are, in chronological order, Ghost Exorcism Inc, Forewarned, Metaphyrical, Ghost Exile, and most recently, Remnant Records, Ghost Watchers, Phantom Hysteria, and This Is a Ghost, plus a special mention for Demonologist. Each of them stands on their own merit, separate from Phas, and in this video I'll be arguing that case, or at least stating why I like and appreciate each of them. So let's start with Phasmophobia, the one we all know and love. While I doubt Phasmophobia invented the ghost hunting investigative horror genre, it certainly was the first to fine-tune and popularize it, not unlike what Vampire Survivors did for arcade survival games, one of the oldest genres in gaming, but that's another story for another video, and I love inserting my correct opinion in places I shouldn't, and this is going on too long now, so anyway, in Phas, you're a paranormal investigator. Think Ghost Hunters, or if you're with your funny, goofy friends, Ghost Adventures. Except you die. A lot. Well, for the first 80 hours of my Phas experience, which was much earlier on, I was deathless, but these days, well, the immersion is through the roof because even my character is constantly broke. Phasmophobia laid down the groundwork for so many knockoffs and evolutions with the wonderful use of tools, atmosphere, and just enough variety to keep us playing. However, with so many that ran with the formula, is Phas still king? In terms of overall polish and amount of content, I'd say the answer is yes. While I personally find a couple others do some things that I definitely prefer, I cannot deny that Phasmophobia remains, unsurprisingly, the most polished. So then, let's see how the others fare. Ghost Exorcism Inc. Sincerest form of flattery and whatnot. Being one of the first definitely opened up to the criticism of being a Phas clone. While, yes, there were many that could clearly be considered a knockoff, ultimately I feel it's a similar situation overall to early FPS titles being considered Doom clones. Case in point, the game formerly known as Ghost Hunters Inc. Yes, you are going into different locales with a set of tools to ascertain the classification of an entity. However, this one was the first, to my knowledge, to take the route of exorcism being the ultimate goal of a mission. It also had the ghosts have much more of a presence, as well as distinct looks for a few that will allow you to immediately identify them. You'll still need to run around and determine other requirements to fulfill prior to the exorcism, however. Audio cues, the presence of insects, and so on and so forth. It's gone through a couple of overhauls, however, and the most recent one leaves it in, while lacking some serious polish, my favorite direction so far. Namely, it added rescue missions. This is a mission type I haven't seen in any other ghost hunting game. For these, you don't bring your own tools beyond the absolute basics. You have two objectives. One, to find a previous team that has been knocked out and rescue them, and two, use the tools that they scattered about to finish the investigation yourself.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
In spite of what it's become, though, it is surprising just how different from Phas it was at the start, especially early on into this initial wave of ghost hunting games. Next, we move on to Forewarned, Phasmienda Phones. Forewarned felt like one of the earliest to truly set itself apart from the others. Of course, the core of using tools to determine a ghost type is still intact, but in this one, you've got a treasure hunting aspect. Scattered about is gold, which you need to buy equipment upgrades, artifacts to fill out your own personal museum, and bits of lore to read. Pretty sure looting Egyptian tombs makes the characters canonically British, but without hearing their voices and whatnot, it's beyond my ability to confirm nor deny. After determining the ghost, in this one you must go to their royal tomb, make sure you hit the correct entity's button, and grab their personal treasure. Once you do so, you're trapped, A button will have appeared on a wall somewhere in the stage, and don't worry, it is lit up. Oh, and memorizing where it appears isn't a thing, as even though there are different locations, each one is randomized from its own tile set, and you can have them vary in size with small, medium, large, and huge. Anyway, if being trapped wasn't enough, you now have to actively avoid the former Pharaoh's Phantom's now physical form. Each has its own appearance and behavior. For example, one is slow and blind, but once it hears you, it will chase you down. While another is a doppelganger, and this one genuinely freaked me out. My friend and I were looking for the switch, talking in Discord instead of the game's VoIP. Yes, I will always spell it out because saying VoIP sounds really weird to me. So I had no idea that wasn't him casually following me around, staring at me as I turned towards him. See, the doppelganger doesn't attack you outright. It blends in as best as it can, and it worked. Needless to say, I sprinted out of there as quickly as possible. And I might have had to change my pants. At some point, the game got even grander though. Now, during the escape sequence, you can find an alternate path, one that leads you to a temple where you face off against hordes of crawling undead as you attempt to banish the spirit you're clearly intruding on. Overall, a solid evolution of the formula. Now for something taking after a different area of pop culture. Metaphyrical. Y'all like Supernatural? Supernatural is a show I only started and finished in the last couple years. Yes, all 15 seasons. Yes, the middle was mid to bad, but the last few were better. And yes, I cried with the ending. On that note, Metaphyrical. This game actually came out in late 2021, and amidst being wrapped up in other ghost hunting games, and despite me being over 10,000 games deep into my discovery queue on Steam, now almost over 18,000 at the time, I just missed it entirely. I also had barely touched Supernatural at the time, so honestly I'm not sure how much I would have been able to appreciate it anyway. On that note, my experience with the game is with its more recent builds. Now, I don't know if they've always had the title screen the same from the beginning, but hot damn, it hooks you in immediately. Beautiful retro pads drone wistfully from the get-go while a neon logo sits in front of you. The presentation is definitely good with this one. Getting into the game, you're presented with the Winchester mobile and an array of tools in the trunk. Once you're actually on the hunt, the interactions with the ghost are generally more unique in this game than others. See, they have a tendency to change the world around you, or at least mess with your head, or hell, sometimes even transport you to other locations entirely. One spirit, for example, flashes an alternate world covered in blood and other horrors when she's actively after you, while another, Baba freaking Yaga, takes you to a nice little arena and chases you around with her, chicken-legged house. It was honestly a lot of fun. Exercising, burning the bones, and so on for these creatures will net you expertise in their type, allowing for benefits when facing them again, and if you manage to successfully exercise 30 of any given type, you even unlock an alternate skin for them, which I haven't seen in any of these other games. It's overall a fun experience, just more than overtly supernatural themed. So let's carry on my wayward son to Ghost Exile, Clone Wars. Ghost Exile is definitely the closest we've got to being an outright clone of Phasmophobia, while still being an actually good game, mind you. The bulk of the hunt, investigation, and so on is just the same as Phas. You've got your numerous tools, locations, and ghost types, and especially in its current state, it all works quite well. Interactions can be neat, as they're often more than just some loud hiss. You'll find them maybe slamming a door shut and playing the sound of a baby or a woman crying as red lights flash from behind it. Or, one of my favorites, you get jump scared by the entire house filling with corpses for half a second alongside a staccato horror note. It's hilarious to scare your friends with that are new to the game.
This locked drawer over here. Oh my god! Did that get you? You saw all those guys? You see all those motherfuckers? You saw all those guys?
This one, however, was the first to truly evolve the exorcism half of the game. Setting up sigils of protection, agitation, and so on, reciting holy words of exorcism with the game's decent voice recognition, it's all just so fun. On top of that, It can be made even tougher by having the spirit world take part in the action. Yeah, you can either have to find the good part of the soul and cleanse it from that realm, or maybe even go into the afterlife and avoid shadow centuries while the, essence of death itself chases you. But yeah, no, and that's not your only bout with the afterlife in the game either. Should the ghost get you and you're with your friends, you'll be stuck in a maze with the angry ghost in tow. Should you find your way out of it, you'll have a nice, cool world to return to, with the ability to interact with some objects, as well as cast a sort of EMF stun on the ghost during its hunt, which said EMF stun actually appears on an EMF 2 on your allies' EMF readers, which I found that to be kind of interesting. Should you fail, however, the world you return to is a hellish red, and you can do nothing but listen as your friends scream and die, helpless to save them, as dark tendrils block your entrance to the house, or museum, or school. All in all, it's absolutely my favorite of the more traditional ghost hunting games. Speaking of favorites, Remnant Records, Jared Leto's Mystery Incorporated. Remnant Records is, quite frankly, the most unique of this bunch of games. You're not coming into the hunt with all the tools of the trade. Instead, you have 4 different classes to choose from. The Cartomancer with his talismans, the Medium with her sight, the Electrician with her electrician's license, and the Musclehead with his, muscles. Each of them serves a solid role, with none of them really feeling unviable. Though I'm quite partial to the Jared Leto lookalike, as the talismans serve as a snare, a sensor, and a hint system. The Medium can view an alternate sight that allows them to see the ghost's favorite room, as well as their position. The Electrician can stun all but the blind runner with her flashlight flare, and the Musclehead can free allies from the clutches of the ghost and is simply able to ignore the doors by being a human master key, shattering any door that they sprint into. So if you're going in without tools, what do you do to discover the ghost? That's the neat part, you don't. This game only has 5 different ghost types at the moment, but they're ever-present and ever-threatening. The Orphan, the Shusher, the Runner, the Mannequin, and the Reflection are all terrifying and all entirely unique from one another. This game is absolutely a quality over quantity situation with fewer maps and entities than the others, for the most part. Anyway, in this game, you're actually setting out to learn about the ghost's past life, searching for journal entries, letters, and so on. These will provide you with clues about their likes and dislikes, and subsequently what you need to place on the ritual table to have a successful exorcism. Some of these clues can be dark, such as poisoning a cheating spouse's coffee, which implies you find a bag of coffee beans, or outright depressing, such as a child finding their parents asleep at the table, while she chooses to sit and wait for them to wake up, but there's a funny smell in the air and she's getting sleepy too, which may involve cutlery or if they have a favorite toy, but it always implies the orphan. Once you start the exorcism, if you're on lower difficulties, you can just find a safe place to hide and wait it out as the chaos ensues. If you're on difficulty 3 or higher, however, you've got to be an active participant. Every entity has their own method of exorcism. From the finding and ringing of 3 spiritual bells for the runner, to playing hide and seek with the orphan, to standing in very visible lights for the sight-based shusher, each one will be drastically different from one another. On top of all of that, the game has even more to it. There are lots of unlockable modifiers to play around with, 14 in total so far. They can be simple stuff like a time limit or no electricity, to even wild ones such as zero gravity. If you couldn't tell, this one is probably my favorite among all of them, in spite of the little amount of content compared to the bulk of them. I would also like to add that as I was nearing completion of this video, an update came out that added an entire perk system. You can customize perk loadouts on all the different classes. The Musclehead is now called the Bodyguard. Everyone is just better. And yeah, I am incredibly excited. Got to play around with it for about an hour and a half. And yeah, Remnant Records, hands down, the best in the genre. I'm just going to lay that out right now. The others, still worth checking out. But by far, this one is just right at the top. Ghost Watchers. Heavy in atmosphere, not necessarily in difficulty. Ghost Watchers is easily among the easiest in this entire collection. The levels may be dripping in atmosphere. The ghosts, assuming assets like many others, are well programmed and rightfully creepy. The game, meanwhile, is just a bit easier from what I played. You get your standard assortment of tools, though this makes you feel a bit more like a Ghostbuster than most, with your myriad of offensive and defensive capabilities. See, this one is dedicated to capturing the ghost. Use science, magic, and all that good stuff to bring it to a near second death and suck it into a box. Thing is, the tools you can use kind of save you from death entirely. It never feels like there's much of a threat, and I can't ever recall dying more than once in my time with it so far. It does still require a fair amount of steps after you've investigated everything in order to capture the spirit, mind you, so in terms of complexity, it's still not the simplest. It really is just the fact that you get so many defensive options to work with that leaves me feeling like this game is a little easier than most of the others. Now, I don't necessarily view that as an overall negative. Some of these games can be quite challenging. I, for one, had left Phas for a good while, and returning to its current state, I have lost my touch entirely, and I died a lot. This game being much easier definitely results in it being far more accessible for less experienced players in the genre, even with it requiring a generally more rigid exorcism process with multiple steps, a la Ghost Exorcism Incorporated. Pulling the steps off is not necessarily too hard to accomplish, it's just there's a lot of them. I do know that it is, or was, one of the most popular titles in the genre when it came out. As long as the effort in general, though, is put in, which does seem to be the case, I do applaud it. So let's move from one of the more popular titles to one of the least. Phantom Hysteria. Why do I hear boss music? Phantom Hysteria is the most recent of this genre that I still consider to be wholly worthwhile, even if updates are few and far between, namely due to the small player base, which is honestly a result of the $20 price tag. However, should it be on sale, or if you have a few friends and some spare cash, I think it could be very well worth your time. How does it set itself apart then? Another is a gangster with a Tommy gun. Finally, we have the little drowned girl in overalls, crying and generating whirlpools and just being so much fun to fight. All three can be quite tough if you're unprepared. These fights alone make it stand way out from the rest of the games here. I just wish more people knew about it because the devs clearly had a really cool idea going. It has a ton of personality too. There are all the different preset voice lines in the game that you can use off of the command wheel. And they even have a difference if you're crouching. If you're crouching, there'll be a whisper. And they have a lot of one-liners. It's just such a neat little package that so many people really need to play. Anyway, with all that covered, I thought I'd briefly bring up This Is a Ghost. Lame name, great game. This one feels somewhat between Remnant Records or Ghost Exile and Metaphyrical or Phantom Hysteria. You have your investigation with your tools, with the added layer of finding their name as well as their date and cause of death. Then you have your guns for exorcising the damn specter with a pretty unique crafting mechanic where the ghost type determines what you need to cut your shotgun shells, or whatever remains of them, with. Say hello to my holy little friend. While that's the basic premise, this game does do a good job with the atmosphere. Not so much on the horror if you're used to this kind of game, but the lighting is well done and it clearly has a lot of love from the one-man dev team. This includes the presence of a fair bit of progression, with 3 different occult factions to gain reputation with, leading to unlocks of upgrades, new ghost types, and new maps. Bear in mind though, this is going to be a long grind. It'll also lead to new difficulties, and let me tell you, this game does not screw around with that. You better spend a lot of time on easy to be absolutely sure in your abilities to investigate and be rid of a ghost, because this is, by far, the hardest of any single ghost hunting game I have played. This is not the type of game you can really carry inexperienced players to higher levels in on your own either. The whole team shares a health pool, so if one player dies, you all die. At the very least, while you don't have to bring your gear, you will still have to pay a rescue fee, as well as lose some reputation with one of those aforementioned factions. This one I absolutely recommend for experienced ghost hunters, more than anything. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, we bring ourselves to Demonologist, unbearably mid. Demonologist is the latest release that got a fair bit of attention from streamers and the like. Trying it out, I can see that it at least has potential. The atmosphere is absolutely thick, aided by being one of the only ones in the genre running on Unreal Engine 5. I believe this is a Ghost may have beat it to the punch, but I can't confirm that. Hell, it even has some unique looks for tools, and purchasable cosmetics, furniture, and multiple save houses. However, that's kinda all it really has. The game relies heavily on its jump scares to try to scare you, at least as much as mostly jaded I could tell. This isn't unlike Ghost Exile scares, but unlike Exiles, they become incredibly predictable very quickly. You can hear low droning sounds, easily memorize potential map triggers, and so on and so forth. Being hunted is hardly scary, though admittedly mildly more so than some of the other games due to the Ghost's iconic blinking the format is known for. Goes at a slower pace, giving the movement a more uncanny feeling. The models are also a more unique selection for the most part. Hiding, though, isn't a thing in this game, as there are no hiding spaces and you can't crouch, and my final complaint, the progression is unbelievably slow, with objectives granting little XP and the cheapest tools, candles and flashlights, costing a minimum of $600, while missions at the start grant a mere $500 in rewards on average, and it just takes too long to get the items that you need. This is unlike the long grind in This Is a Ghost, where, at the very least, you always have all the items necessary to complete the hunt, including all side objectives. Now, with all these negatives being said, it can have some cool ideas, such as unique interactions based on the map, like a mirror where you say Bloody Mary 3 times. One thing that left me a little worried was one of the developers' more recent update news, as of this script being originally written, was the opening of their publisher page to quote-unquote keep an eye out for future games, when this game is not even remotely finished as is. Really, I just kind of wanted to express my disdain for the hype surrounding Demonologist in the face of, frankly, more enjoyable alternatives, at least in my opinion. This one does have potential, but I just don't know how long it'll be till it actually reaches it. And postscript update, it does seem that they at least do still have more content coming, so my fears are at least partly assuaged. On Dark Terms. It's paranormal investigation open world RPG, which that's like with online co-op, which that's just like everything I want mashed together in concept. In concept. This game's just hit public early access, but it's absolutely promising enough to land on this list. It sits right up there with Remnant Records and Phantom Hysteria as being among the most unique in the genre, with this one eschewing the simple lobbies we're so familiar with, instead opting for a full open-world RPG-light experience. In On Dark Terms, you're playing to save the Earth in the midst of its darkest hour, with the aid of a Loa, who grants you a feline companion that you can also control. You have a sizable urban map scattered with points of interest, crafting materials, and so on, with each individual point having a crafting and research station as well as a dungeon. These dungeons are actually the portion that would otherwise be just a regular mission or run in other Ghost games, except you'll be transforming into a spirit cat to find hidden dark matter and fending off hallucinations, as well as in human form and trapping energies, fending off hunts, so on and so forth. Earlier I mentioned it was an RPG light, and that's due to the fact that while the game does have leveling, it seems to only contribute to cosmetic unlocks for now, though I'm certain that will change. The co-op was fairly painless, in spite of a hiccup with the second half of the tutorial. No other issues that we saw in our brief play so far. Overall though, this one is absolutely one to keep an eye on, if not play it for yourself. 100% recommend. Honorable mentions. Obsidio. This game is awesome but flawed. It stands out by having the absolute widest variety of evidence types to sort through, which I found pretty cool. Unfortunately, it's been long dormant due to having originally been a project made for some friends just to begin with. Worth playing if you can look past some issues. I even had an entire entry written for it, but it's just not an easy recommendation with the abandoned state it's in. They Die Tomorrow. Really interesting concept where you investigate a murder that's going to happen, with the murderer occasionally popping in to stop you in your little pocket of space-time. Sadly, the execution is just really rough. Malum. Still involves investigating a type of ghost and has some decent polish, lets you shoot a stripper leech, and lets you play as a demon hunter and a cop in a fursuit, but sadly it just seems it's been abandoned outright. Still a fun time for a decent price if you're willing. Unnatural investigations. Cool ideas with multiple classes, guns, and a boss fight system, but as it stands, it's just not in a polished enough state that I can safely recommend. One to at least keep an eye on. Forsake, Holy Purge, Gnosos, Labyrinthine, and other puzzle adventure horror titles. While some are still fun, such as Forsake and Labyrinthine, which both have plenty of content and I do wholly recommend, they just don't really fall into the investigative horror that I'm emphasizing with this list. Just didn't want to omit them entirely to make sure people understand exactly what I'm going for here. From Fear. This one had a really interesting theme, but ultimately felt a little too claustrophobic and a tad grindy. Also, not so much of an investigation game, more of a survive, loot, and escape, looking for scraps and such before getting out of there without dying. Another that has potential but seems to be abandoned. Handy Harry's Haunted House Services. Really, this one isn't even a contender for this list. It's completely unrelated, being a procedurally generated horror game for up to 8 players, co-op or PvP, more in line with the puzzle adventure horror, but it's such a blast that I always want to throw it in on these kinds of lists anyway. In conclusion, the goal of this video was to showcase the ghost hunting and investigative horror genre in this day and age. Again, unsure just how many games really attempted this prior to Phasmophobia, but I just wanted to showcase the ones that stand out for one reason or another, and to help make the case for them not simply being Phas clones, no more than how Duke Nukem, Marathon Blood, etc. were considered Doom clones. And I really do hope that I encouraged some of you to actually look at some of these games, because there are a lot of good ones, and people discount them way too easily because Phas sits at the top, and that's all there is to it to them. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. This has been Phreaksho's Take.